There are stories we hear every day, loud ones, dramatic ones, the kind that fill your screen with fire, flags, and fury. But some stories, the most important ones, are whispered, hidden, left in the shadows. Tonight, you're not going to hear what they want you to hear. You're going to hear what they won't say out loud. Because beneath the smoke and sound of war, there's something far more fragile and far more dangerous. Nation's economy unraveling silently. It's a land in crisis, not just on its borders. In its banks, its businesses, its broken budgets, its bleeding billions. Yet no one is talking about it. But we will. And if you stay with me through this journey, you won't just understand the numbers. You'll feel the weight. You'll see the truth hidden between headlines. And you'll walk away with eyes wide open. So lean in, listen close. Because once you hear what's really happening, you'll never look at the story the same way again. Let's begin. Israel's war economy has become one of the most overlooked dimensions of the ongoing conflict, yet it's one of the most impactful. With every military operation, from airstrikes to prolonged ground offensives, the economic toll deepens. The most immediate cost is the sheer volume of defense spending. Billions are funneled into maintaining the Iron Dome, deploying reserve units, sustaining long-term military readiness, and acquiring new equipment. These expenses go well beyond routine defense budgets. During times of intense conflict, Israel has historically spent as much as $260 million, 0 cents per day, on military operations. That number increases when reserves are called up in the tens or hundreds of thousands, as they must be paid, housed, and fed while simultaneously being removed from their civilian jobs, slowing down the broader economy. The defense industry, though often hailed as a pillar of Israeli innovation, cannot single-handedly offset these costs. Many of its exports suffer delays or cancellations during times of active war, as domestic needs take precedence. Moreover, while war often consolidates national unity in the short term, in Israel it's increasingly causing internal tension, with protests over judicial reform, compulsory military service, and economic inequality all re-emerging. These domestic pressures further destabilize the already strained economy. Damage to infrastructure adds another layer of economic loss. Cities near the Gaza border have suffered repeated missile strikes, requiring rebuilding efforts that run into the billions. Businesses in the south close for weeks or months at a time, and transportation networks are frequently disrupted. The ripple effect is immense, from agriculture to construction to logistics. Inflation also creeps in during times of war. Consumer confidence drops. Investors pull out or pause. Credit ratings face pressure. And while foreign allies, particularly the United States, continue to provide military aid, these funds do not directly bolster the civilian economy. Instead, Israel is increasingly forced to borrow, expanding its national debt while reducing funding available for health, education, and social services. Unlike previous decades when Israel's economic model was more resilient and its global perception more favorable, the current crisis reflects a system pushed to its limits. As the war economy grows, so does the gap between the official narrative of security and the silent hemorrhaging of economic vitality. Tourism has long been a vital artery in Israel's economy, generating billions annually and supporting hundreds of thousands of jobs directly and indirectly. However, with the escalation of conflict, especially the intense military operations in Gaza and the heightened regional instability, this lifeline has been nearly severed. International travelers have become increasingly wary of visiting a country that is constantly in a state of military alert. Major airlines have suspended or severely reduced their flights to Tel Aviv's Ben Gurion airport due to security risks, and insurance premiums for travel to Israel have soared, discouraging even the most adventurous tourists. Hotels, particularly in key areas like Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and the Dead Sea, which once thrived on a steady influx of international visitors, now face record low occupancy rates. Tour guides, small business owners, restaurants, souvenir vendors, and countless others who depend on tourism for their livelihoods are witnessing a collapse in demand. Many have been forced to shut down temporarily, while others have gone out of business entirely. For a country that typically welcomes over 4 million tourists a year, the economic void left by this collapse is staggering. Religious tourism, a cornerstone of Israel's visitor economy, has also been deeply affected. Pilgrims from Europe, Latin America, and Asia are now postponing or canceling trips altogether. The Christian holy sites in Jerusalem, Nazareth, and Bethlehem are unusually quiet, especially during peak seasons such as Easter and Christmas, which traditionally bring a massive influx of visitors. The psychological image of Israel as a land steeped in historical wonder has now been replaced in many minds with scenes of conflict, missile strikes, and humanitarian suffering. Local municipalities that heavily relied on tourism revenue are struggling with budget shortfalls. Services that were once funded by the steady stream of tourist taxes, such as public transport enhancements, urban beautification projects, and cultural festivals, are now being cut or indefinitely delayed. The cascading effects touch nearly every sector of the economy, from agriculture that supplies food to hotels to artists who depend on tourist-driven events. What makes this downturn more alarming is that, unlike a global pandemic or natural disaster, this collapse in tourism is rooted in political and military decisions that offer no clear end in sight. The longer the instability continues, the deeper the damage becomes to Israel's global image and its ability to recover economically. Investor confidence in Israel has been quietly but steadily deteriorating, and the economic implications of this shift are profound. Foreign direct investment, which once flowed reliably into Israel's vibrant tech ecosystem and infrastructure projects, has slowed significantly. The country's reputation as a startup haven, built on decades of innovation and a skilled workforce, is now being overshadowed by growing political instability and the unpredictability of regional conflict. Global investors, particularly those in Europe and North America, are reevaluating their exposure to Israeli markets. The risk calculus has changed. What once seemed like a calculated bet on high-tech returns is now increasingly seen as a gamble in a volatile political environment. This decline in investor sentiment is not solely due to external conflict. Internal political divisions have also shaken confidence. Israel's controversial judicial reforms have sparked mass protests and concerns over democratic backsliding, prompting warnings from credit rating agencies and financial institutions. Investors worry that the erosion of institutional checks and balances could undermine the rule of law, a critical component of any stable investment environment. Combined with the rising cost of conflict, these internal disruptions have created a perfect storm for capital flight. Some of Israel's largest tech firms and venture capital groups have begun shifting assets overseas, setting up alternative headquarters in Europe or the United States to hedge against domestic uncertainty. Stock market performance has reflected this anxiety. The Tel Aviv Stock Exchange has experienced increased volatility, and certain sectors have seen sharp declines, particularly those relying on foreign capital. The shekel has also come under pressure, adding another layer of unpredictability to investment decisions. Multinational corporations that once considered Israel a key regional hub are reconsidering expansion plans or delaying them altogether. The perception that Israel offers a stable and secure environment for investment is being challenged in boardrooms around the world. Meanwhile, smaller investors are pulling up more quietly, shifting capital into safer markets in Asia, North America, or even other Middle Eastern states with less geopolitical exposure. This erosion of investor trust is gradual but corrosive. Without robust capital inflows, innovation slows, job creation stalls, and economic growth becomes harder to sustain. The current trend, if it continues, could result in a significant rebalancing of Israel's economic relationships and a lasting decline in its attractiveness to the global financial community. Israel's tech sector, once celebrated as the backbone of its modern economy, is experiencing an unsettling shift. Known globally as the startup nation, Israel has long been a magnet for innovation, venture capital, and world-class talent. However, the current environment, marked by internal political turmoil and growing international scrutiny, is triggering a silent exodus. Leading tech companies and startups alike are beginning to relocate operations abroad, not just for expansion, but for survival. The reasons are multifaceted, but deeply rooted in fear. Fear of instability, of economic unpredictability, and of reputational damage in the global market. For years, the Israeli tech ecosystem benefited from a stable flow of foreign investment, high government support, and access to global talent. Today, that equation is changing. Investors are growing cautious, pulling back on funding rounds or redirecting capital to more politically neutral markets. Talented engineers, developers, and entrepreneurs are seeking opportunities in Europe, the United States, and even Southeast Asia, where they perceive better long-term security and fewer political risks. This is not just a temporary relocation. In many cases, companies are moving headquarters, transferring intellectual property, and reseparating abroad. To distance themselves from the volatility back home, startups, particularly those dependent on foreign clients or international markets, are facing additional challenges. Clients are beginning to question the reliability of doing business with firms based in a conflict zone. Insurance costs are rising, and cybersecurity threats are intensifying, with wartime vulnerabilities expanding beyond the battlefield into digital space. As a result, confidence in the Israeli tech brand, once synonymous with innovation and resilience, is quietly eroding. The exodus also reflects deeper dissatisfaction within the tech community about domestic policy decisions. Judicial reforms, perceived authoritarian drift, and social divisions are fueling a brain drain. Highly educated and skilled individuals are choosing to build their futures elsewhere, where they feel their rights and livelihoods are more secure. For a sector that thrives on intellectual freedom and global mobility, the current climate is proving increasingly incompatible. This slow but steady unraveling has long-term implications. Israel's economic miracle, largely driven by tech, cannot be sustained without its talent, capital, and global goodwill. If this trend continues unchecked, the country risks losing not just revenue, but its position as a global innovation leader, a loss far greater than any immediate financial figure can capture. Israel's growing defense spending and war expenditures are putting intense pressure on its public services and deepening the country's debt burden. As more funds are diverted to military operations, emergency logistics, and security infrastructure, less is available for critical sectors like healthcare, education, housing, and welfare. This reallocation has immediate and long-term consequences for the average citizen. Hospitals face budget constraints, resulting in longer wait times, staff shortages, and delayed treatments. Public schools in low-income areas are seeing funding gaps, overcrowded classrooms, and diminished educational resources. Social services, already strained, are being pushed to the edge at a time when vulnerable populations such as the elderly, the disabled, and low-income families need the most. Municipal governments are also struggling to keep up. With declining revenue from tourism and small business taxes and rising demands for emergency services and civil protection, local authorities find themselves under-resourced. Infrastructure projects are being shelved or indefinitely postponed, including upgrades to roads, public transport, sanitation, and energy networks. This deterioration in basic civic services is felt most acutely in towns near conflict zones, but its ripple effect is nationwide. Citizens who once believed in the strength of the state are beginning to question whether their needs are truly being prioritized. Compounding the issue is Israel's rising national debt. To finance military operations and cover budget shortfalls, the government has had to borrow extensively, both from domestic sources and international creditors. Debt levels, which were already elevated following the COVID-19 pandemic, have surged further. As borrowing costs increase and credit ratings face potential downgrades, the pressure on the economy grows. The state must now spend more on interest payments, diverting yet more funds away from public needs and long-term development goals. Inflation and rising living costs add another layer of strain. Basic commodities, utilities, and housing are becoming increasingly unaffordable, especially for young families and working-class citizens. At the same time, wage growth has stalled for many sectors outside of defense and tech. These economic stresses are fueling public frustration and widening the gap between different segments of Israeli society. The sense of shared sacrifice that once bound the nation together is fracturing under the weight of economic inequality and uneven burdens. With public services underfunded and debt reaching unsustainable levels, the social contract between the state and its people is being tested in unprecedented ways. The economic crisis unfolding in Israel is not only severe, but also largely concealed from public discourse due to a strategic combination of media silence and distraction. While international news outlets continue to focus on the geopolitical and military dimensions of the conflict, little attention is given to the deep financial wounds the country is suffering. This silence is not accidental. Governments, especially during wartime, often rely on controlled narratives to maintain public morale and international support. In Israel's case, economic distress is downplayed in favor of messaging that emphasizes security threats, resilience, and national unity. As a result, the scale of financial hemorrhaging, billions lost through defense spending, collapsing tourism, and investor retreat, rarely makes headlines. At the same time, the Israeli public is presented with a narrative that heavily leans on existential threats and national survival, making economic critiques appear unpatriotic or marginal. Questions about rising debt, failing public services, and a deteriorating business climate are often brushed aside or overshadowed by emotional appeals tied to national defense. This deflection shields policymakers from deeper scrutiny and delays meaningful debate about long-term consequences. In parallel, major media channels within the country often echo the state's framing, whether through loyalty, fear of backlash, or alignment with political interests. The result is a climate in which economic truths are buried beneath slogans of security and strength. Globally, the same pattern persists. Media coverage from outside Israel often emphasizes the humanitarian aspects of the conflict or focuses on high-profile political developments. Economic reporting remains limited to occasional updates on aid packages or investor reactions, without deeper analysis of systemic collapse. Think tanks and financial analysts who raise alarms do so in specialized forms far removed from mainstream awareness. Consequently, even foreign governments and businesses may underestimate the fragility of Israel's internal economy. This veil of distraction has serious implications. Without open discussion of the financial strain, policy responses remain reactive rather than strategic. Public understanding is limited, reducing pressure for reforms or alternative approaches. Moreover, international allies may continue their support without grasping the full scope of Israel's economic instability, investing in short-term military partnerships while missing the longer-term risks of economic breakdown. As media and political focus remains fixated on the battlefield, a quieter, more dangerous erosion continues behind the scenes, one that could eventually reshape Israel's position not only in the Middle East, but in the global economic order. What we see on the surface, the missiles, the headlines, the rallies, is only part of the story. Beneath it all, Israel is quietly bleeding billions. From a collapsing tourism industry to a vanishing tech sector, from drained public services to fleeing investors, the economic core of the nation is cracking under pressure. And yet, so few are talking about it. Not because the signs aren't there, but because distraction and silence have become the strategy. But the truth doesn't disappear just because it's ignored. It waits. And eventually, it rises. To understand this moment is to see beyond the noise, to see a nation not only fighting a war with weapons, but one struggling with the price of its own choices. It's a price measured not just in money, but in futures deferred, services diminished, and trust eroded. And so, as the world watches the fires above, let us not forget to look at the ground below, where economies fall long before empires do. Thank you for lending your time, your ears, and most importantly, your attention to the untold story. Stay informed, stay critical, and always seek what lies beneath the surface. Good luck on your journey toward truth. Until next time, stay wise, stay strong, and thank you.